welcome to Kinesiology 220. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, the human body. It's really important to have an understanding of the basics of the human body. Without understanding those basic structures and functions of the human body, it's really hard to assess someone when they have an injury or whenever they have an illness, to be able to provide them with care. It's also really good for yourself in general. This is one of those things we talked about, why it's important to learn first aid. It brings value to yourself because now if you understand the basic functions of the body, you can understand more about what's wrong with yourself when you're not feeling well. Let's say you're having stomach issues and you don't really understand what's going on. Understanding the basic functions of the body will let you understand why you might be having issues with your stomach. If you're having tightness in your chest, it might help you to understand why you might be having tightness in your chest. It also lets you know when it's important for you to get advanced medical care if you understand why the body is doing what it's doing. The most important parts and sensitive organs in the body are the lungs, the heart, the brain, and the spinal cord. We're going to talk about all of those today. The human body is made up of the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the nervous system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, and the skin. We're going to talk about all of those today. We're going to mostly focus on the respiratory system, the circulatory system, and the nervous system. The skeletal system, the muscular system, and the skin we're going to kind of touch on really quickly because those are things that we're going to talk about later on in the quarter. The respiratory system, the body can only go for about 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen-rich blood. After 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen-rich blood, you're going to start to experience loss of function of organs, and you're going to start to potentially get into that situation where a person might not be able to survive without that oxygen-rich blood. Oxygen from air is made available to the blood through the respiratory system. Respiration is the passage of air into and out of the lungs. We inhale and take a breath. We exhale and breathe out. So when we inhale oxygen-rich blood, oxygen in the air. And when we exhale CO2. That's something that we learned very basic in second grade science. We inhale oxygen, we exhale CO2. Ventilation is a mechanical process that alternately increases and decreases the size of the chest cavity. So when we inhale, our lungs increase. The diaphragm pushes on our lungs. It causes our lungs to inhale with air, so it kind of blows up like a big balloon. Actually makes it easier for us to float on water when we have a big breath of air. When we exhale, our diaphragm relaxes and allows our lungs to get back smaller, and we lose all that air in our lungs, and it actually makes us, if we're floating in water, it's going to make us sink a little bit. Okay? So let's talk about how that oxygen gets into our lungs when we breathe in. So when we breathe in, air normally enters the body through inhalation through the nostrils. There it is warmed, moistened, and filtered. That's what those little tiny hairs inside of your nose do. They serve a purpose. What those little tiny hairs do is they filter. They act like a filter, just like a pool filter would do. And let's say you take in a foreign body that's not going to be good for your body, like pollen or something like that. Those little tiny filters are going to hit those, and it's going to send an impulse to your brain, and it's going to say sneeze. That sneeze is going to get rid of that bad stuff. It's going to prevent it from even getting into our system. Okay, that's why we want to inhale through our nose rather than inhale through our mouth, because our mouth doesn't provide that filter that the nose is going to do. Air enters the nasal portion of the pharynx, the throat. At the end of the pharynx, there are 2 tubes, one for food and one for air passage. Okay, this little thing right here called the epiglottis, that's what's going to help divide that food between your lungs and to go into your digestive system. Okay, so if that epiglottis is not functioning properly, then food can actually get down into the lungs. It can cause illness. It can cause someone to develop pneumonia, those kinds of things. So we want to make sure that that food goes down the right pipe. Muscle control in the throat routes food to the esophagus and into the stomach. Air is routed to the pharynx, so the trachea. That's your windpipe. That's this right here. Okay. From the trachea, it's going to branch into 2 main tubes, the bronchioles, one for each lung. Each bronchiole subdivides into thousands of tiny pouches called alveoli. Each alveoli is enclosed in a network of capillaries. The walls that surround these capillaries is very thin. Okay, that means that oxygen-rich blood is going to go through these walls, and it's going to combine with hemoglobin in your red blood cells to form oxyhemoglobin. That oxyhemoglobin is then going to be carried throughout the body. And that's what's going to deliver that oxygen-rich blood through your bloodstream and help you to get that oxygen that your body needs to be able to function. Okay. Carbon dioxide and certain other waste gases in the blood move across the capillary walls into that alveoli and are exhaled from the body. So that oxygen-rich blood is going to go out, and that carbon dioxide and that waste is going to come into the bloodstream, and then it's going to come in through the lungs and out to that alveoli, and it's going to be exhaled from the lungs out of the mouth or out of the nose. The diaphragm, remember I told you the diaphragm is what's going to help contract. When it contracts to cause the lungs to expand, drawing air into the lungs. And when the diaphragm relaxes, it exerts pressure on the lungs and it causes air to flow out. Okay, so when the diaphragm contracts, that's when we take a breath. When the diaphragm relaxes, that's when we exhale out. The lungs are going to occupy the most space within the chest cavity. So anytime we get any kind of injury to our chest, it can be very serious because it can any damage to the chest cavity could potentially cause damage to the lungs because they take up so much of the chest cavity. When we think about the respiratory system, we have to talk about breathing rates. Your breathing rate is going to decrease at rest. So when we're sleeping at night, our breathing rate is actually going to slow down. When we exercise, it's going to increase. Okay, and that breathing rate is going to be controlled by our brain. We're going to talk about that later whenever we get to the circulatory system. Okay, so when we work harder, when we're exercising, we're producing more CO2. Okay, and the lungs can't get rid of that CO2 fast enough. Okay, so what the body does is the body reacts and it causes you to breathe harder, to exhale that CO2 from the body faster. Okay, so there you go. Our breathing rate is going to increase as we exercise. As our breathing rate increases, our heart rate is going to also increase because we're going to have to get more oxygen-rich blood pumped through our system. Okay, and so then our heart rate is going to increase as well. Okay, so for an adult, the normal breathing rate, normal meaning not at exercise and not sleeping, is going to be 12 to 20 beats or 12 to 20 respirations a minute. Okay, so breaths a minute. A child is going to be anywhere from 15 to 30 breaths per minute, and an infant is going to be anywhere from 25 to 50 breaths per minute. And remember, when we sleep, all of those are going to go down, typically. Respiratory system, if you have signs of inadequate breathing in a person, they're going to have rates outside of the normal range, meaning they're going to have lower breathing rates or higher breather rates. Cool or clammy skin that is pale or blue or purple looking. They might also have nasal flaring. They might also be grabbing at their chest because their chest might be tight from all of that increase of CO2 in the body. For children and infants, when we think about respiration, children and infants typically have smaller respiratory systems because their lungs are going to be smaller, their bodies are going to be smaller, their trachea is actually going to be really flexible. Their tongue is going to take up more space in their body. So that also can mean that they're going to have, because everything's smaller, it means that food can cause airway obstructions. Even something as small as milk can cause an airway obstruction for an infant. If a child has an allergic reaction, their tongue could swell up and cause breathing issues. So that's why with children and infants, most of the time, if they have some kind of a cardiac arrest, it's going to be caused by some kind of a respiratory problem, usually asthma or an allergic reaction. Allergic reactions in children are typically way more serious than they are in an adult, again, because their respiratory systems are so much smaller than an adult. The other thing about a child is you don't ever know what they're allergic to because you're still learning what they're allergic to. That's why a lot of times parents will put off giving their child these things that we're typically allergic to, like peanut butter or nuts or things like that, because we don't quite know whether their child's going to be allergic to those things or not. Okay. All right, moving from the respiratory system onto the circulatory system. The circulatory system is made up of your blood, your heart, and your blood vessels. The circulatory system is the great delivery system of the body. It's basically like a train system that runs through the body. Blood carries nutrients and other products from the digestive tract. Blood carries oxygen from the lungs, and then blood transports waste throughout the body to get it filtered and processed through the lungs and out of the system. Okay. So to start off the circulatory system, we have to start at the heart. The heart is the pump, okay, of the system. By contracting and relaxing, the heart pumps blood through the vessels. So those cardiac muscles that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, those cardiac muscles cause the heart to beat. Okay, they cause the heart to pump and contract. Okay, relax and contract and relax and contract and relax and contract. And that's what opens and closes those blood vessels, which are then going to push the blood through the body. The heart is a powerful hollow muscular organ. It's hollow. Inside of it, it's got these little atriums, and it's got these little veins and things like that that run through them, and that's what's going to cause, these are going to open and close, and that's what's going to cause that blood to pump through the heart to the various parts of the body. That's why whenever you listen to your, if you hold up a stethoscope to your heart, it's going to sound like a very hollow sound, and because that sound that you're hearing is actually these vessels opening and closing, opening and closing. Okay, the heart is about the size of a man's clenched fist, shaped like a pear. It's located in the left center of the chest. The heart is divided by a wall to create the right and left compartments. Compartments are divided into two chambers, the atrium above and the ventricle below. Okay, that thump that you hear are those walls, those doors basically, between the atrium and the ventricles opening and closing. Okay, so during contraction, the heart pumps blood high in CO2 and low in O2 from the right ventricle to the lungs. Okay, so that dirty blood that's coming from the body is going to come into the heart into the right ventricle, okay, and it's going to get pumped to the lungs. Okay, O2 rich blood is returned from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart from the lungs. Okay, so the body is going to send that dirty CO2 rich blood through the right atrium. It's going to send it into the lungs. The lungs are the filter that's going to clean up that dirty blood, okay, and then it's going to pump it out back into the system through the left atrium. Okay, remember we talked about, and then that dirtiness, all that CO2 and all that waste is then exhaled from the lungs to the body. Okay, exhaled through the nose or through the mouth. The left ventricle then pushes the O2-rich blood to the rest of the body, and the right atrium receives oxygen-rich blood again. Okay, so it's just this continuous process. Dirty blood into the right atrium, goes into the lungs, gets filtered and cleaned out, exhaled out of the lungs, and it's going to come back in through the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and go back into the body through the left ventricle. It's just this continuous process over and over and over and over and over again. Okay. The circulatory system is also made up of blood vessels. These are those things that's going to carry that clean and that dirty blood. Arteries are elastic muscular tubes that carry blood away from the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Okay, they begin at the heart, two large tubes, the pulmonary artery and the aorta. The pulmonary artery carries blood to the lungs, and the aorta carries blood to the other parts of the body and divides into capillaries. Okay, so the pulmonary artery goes to the lungs, and the aorta carries blood to other parts of the body and divides into capillaries. Okay, got that? Capillaries are a network of extremely fine vessels. Okay, these vessels are O2 and provide oxygen and nourishment, pass out of the bloodstream into the body's cells. Okay, so those capillaries are going to carry that clean oxygen to the body and into the body's cells. Those cells are going to discharge waste into the bloodstream. Okay, and then that blood is going to go back to the heart and get pumped to that right atrium, into the right ventricle, into the lungs, and get cleaned and processed, and then sent back out again. Okay, remember that process, just a continuous system of cleaning and filtering, veins become larger and larger. Okay, as they go through the body, they form major trunks that empty blood returning from the body into the right atrium. Blood returning from the lungs goes into the left. Remember, it goes into the left atrium from the lungs. Okay. When we think about the circulatory system, we think about the pulse. Okay, the pulse is a surge of blood that occurs each time the heart contracts. Can be left at any point where an artery is near the skin surface. Blood from a cut artery spurts, and blood from a cut vein flows. So an artery is going to be much larger. Okay, it's going to have a lot of blood in it. It's going to have a lot of pressure in it too. So if you cut that artery, it's going to spurt because it's going to be a lot of blood coming out of it. Whereas a vein is going to be much smaller. The blood's going to be flowing quite as fast. When you cut that, it's just going to flow. So the average heart rate for an adult is going to be 60 to 100 beats a minute. Adolescent is going to be 60 to 90 beats a minute. Child anywhere from 75 to 100 beats a minute. Toddler 100 to 120 beats a minute. Infant 120 to 160. So if you notice, as the individual gets younger, the heart rate gets higher. Okay, And typically the same thing happens with an adult. As an adult gets a little bit older, that heart rate could increase or it could decrease depending on the health of the individual. You can actually, while we're sitting here, I want you to actually go in and find your pulse points. We're going to start off at the radial. Radial is going to be on your wrist. See if you can find that pulse on your radial. You can also find it right on your neck, on your carotid artery. And then on your brachial artery, it's going to be right above your elbow. Okay, your femoral artery is going to be inside your thigh. Depending on how large your thighs are, that might be difficult. How much fat you have on your thighs, it could be harder or easier. The posterior tibial is going to be right inside your ankle, and the dorsalis pedis is going to be right on the top of your foot. For an infant who their skull has not fused yet, they still have that soft spot on the top of their head, you can actually still see their pulse through the top of their head. But once that soft spot has fused, once those joints in the skull have fused, and we'll talk about that in a minute, then you're not going to be able to see that pulse anymore at the top of their head. Circulatory system, we have to talk about blood pressure. Blood pressure is the measure of the pressure exerted by the blood on the walls of the flexible arteries. Okay, so blood pressure might be high or low according to the resistance offered by the walls to the passage of blood. Okay, so let's say someone has low blood pressure. What that means is that blood does not fill the system, okay, either from blood loss or from a cut or from some kind of an illness, okay. Low blood pressure typically means hypotension, okay, so it means low tension on the blood vessels. That person's then going to means that you have two numbers of blood pressure. One is that top number, that's how long it takes. So when that person's pumping that pump up, they're listening to hear when when they no longer can hear your heartbeat, okay? And when they can no longer hear that, that's when they stop. And then they're going to start coming back down on that dial. And that last number you hear is when they start to hear that blood start pumping again, okay? That's how they get those two numbers. The top is when it stops beating, when they put enough pressure to actually stop the heart stop hearing that pulse coming in, and whenever that lower number is when it starts beating again. Okay, so let's say somebody has high blood pressure. That means they're going to have what we call hypertension. That's usually caused by some kind of plaque or something that's going to be blocking those arterial walls, and it's going to prevent that blood from being able to get through the system. So that basically means that the heart and the blood has to actually pump harder to get through those blood vessels. Okay, and typically if someone has high blood pressure, they're going to put them on some kind of a blood thinner, or they're going to recommend surgery to go in and clean out that plaque within those walls, to put some kind of a shunt or a stent in there that's going to help open up those walls. And so, or they're going to put them on some kind of a medication, or work on their diet and exercise to help them to just get healthier. Okay. So blood pressure. The other part of the circulatory system that we're going to talk about is the blood. Blood is typically made up, the liquid portion is made up of plasma, is what that's called. The liquid portion of blood is called plasma. Blood is made up of 90% water. Okay, so when you get dehydrated, you're not only affecting your cells, but you're also affecting your bloodstream, because 90% of that blood is water. Blood is going to carry food materials. It's also going to carry waste materials. The other thing that it does is it has red blood cells. Red blood cells are what carries that oxygen through your bloodstream. Okay, red blood cells are the solid portion. They're going to give blood its color. Okay, typically when blood is in the veins, it's got a bluish color, and when it's exposed to air, it turns red. Okay, the white blood cells are your defense against infection. So if you've gone to the hospital and they've told you that your white blood cell count is really high, it probably means that you've got some kind of infection. They're going to start running tests to figure out what that is. Platelets are essential for blood clotting. So if you hear them say someone's platelet count is really low, then it means if they are to get a cut, then they're probably not going to be able to, their blood's not going to clot, and they're not going to be able to stop bleeding. People who are typically on blood thinners, that decreases their platelet count. It also increases their chances of, if they get a cut, of not being able to stop bleeding. So that's why that platelet count is so important. The last thing we're going to talk about with the circulatory system is shock. We're going to have a whole chapter on shock later on in the quarter. Actually, I think it's this week we're going to talk about shock. Perfusion is the circulation of blood through an organ or a structure. Okay, that's normal. Perfusion is normal. When normal circulation is functioning and the oxygen-rich blood is flowing through the system, through the organs, through the structures, through the veins, all those things, then we have what we call perfusion. Hypoperfusion is when we have inadequate circulation of blood through an organ. Okay, that's when your body's going to go into shock. Okay, so let's say you get a massive cut. Let's say you have a massive shock. Let's say you have a heart attack. Okay, let's say you have an asthma attack and your body is not able to get in oxygen-rich blood through your respiratory system that then go into your bloodstream. Your body's going to go into shock. Okay, so for someone who's going into shock, again, we're going to talk about this more later on this week. They're going to have pale or clammy or cool looking skin, rapid pulse, rapid breathing, because remember, it's kind of like exercise. When you start to exercise and you've got too much CO2 in your system, your body reacts by increasing your respiratory rate. It also increases your pulse to try to get that to get the body to breathe harder, to take in more oxygen. So you're going to see those increases in pulse and breathing. The person might be actually restless or anxious, or they might have mental dullness, meaning they actually might not be able to think properly or answer questions properly. They could be nauseous, they could be vomiting. They could actually have a reduction in their total blood volume. The body is going to be going into protection mode, trying to protect itself, trying to protect its organs. So a lot of times what happens is that blood typically will flow more densely into that internal organ area, trying to protect those organs from going into shock. Okay, so that's when you're going to feel those extremities starting to tingle. Somebody might pass out. Same thing, they're going to feel tingling in their legs because, again, that body is going into protection mode and all that blood is trying to get into those internal organs to try to protect them and keep them healthy. The person's body temperature might also drop because of that reason. All right, so moving from the circulatory system, now we're moving on to the nervous system. The nervous system is a complex collection of nerve cells or neurons that coordinate the work of all the parts of the human body and keep the individual in touch with the outside world. Okay, so neurons, those are those nervous cells. They receive stimuli, they transmit impulses, and produce nerve impulses. The thing about these is they cannot be regenerated. So if someone damages, if you damage the neurons, your nerve cells, then they're not able to be regenerated. I always tell this story. I have a really good friend who, when we were in high school, he was sliding into second base, and when he did, his hand went up under the base and it caught that metal bar that's up underneath the plate that holds the plate down to the ground, and it was not put down properly, and his hand went up underneath it, and he actually cut all those nerves up his middle finger, and so he cut all those muscles, cut all those nerves, and they actually had to go in and do surgery, but it damaged all those nerves in his finger. And so now to this day, even still, I think it's been about 15 years since it happened, he can't feel his middle finger. And then whenever he goes to make a fist, he actually cannot close. His middle finger will not actually close, and so he actually has to physically move it to make it close. So a lot of times when he goes to close his hand, it actually looks like he's flipping you off because he can't close his middle finger because he's damaged all of those nerve cells within his finger. Pretty funny. All right, so to start with the nervous system, we're going to start with the central nervous system. That would be our brain. The brain is the headquarters of the human nervous system. It's the most highly specialized organ of the body, requires considerable amounts of oxygen. It's divided into three main subdivisions: the cerebrum, which is that big portion on the top, the cerebellum, which is going to be that cauliflower-looking little place back in the back of the brain, and then the brain stem, which is that yellow portion that's coming down and is going to go into the spinal cord. Okay, if you've never watched Inside Out, the Disney cartoon, I highly recommend that you watch it. It's really, really, really good at talking about the processes of the central nervous system and how the body takes in information and processes it. It's just a really, really good view in a childlike way of how the brain actually works. So the cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, the left and the right. This controls functions such as sensation, thought, associative memory. The occipital lobe is the sight center. The temporal lobe directs smell and hearing. Okay, so different parts of the body do different things. I work a lot with children with special needs, a lot of children with autism, a lot of children with cerebral palsy, and these are all neurological disorders. And it's very interesting, especially with those children with cerebral palsy who've had some kind of damage to some portion of the brain. Some of them have actually been able to process and develop, and the scientists go in and look at their look at brain scans on those children, they started actually functioning and using portions of their brain for different functions that they're actually not supposed to be able to use it for. So because different portions of the brain control different functions of the body. Okay. The cerebellum is located in the back of the cranium, the skull. It's below the cerebrum. It's that little cauliflower-looking ball at the back of the brain. That's what coordinates your muscular activity and your balance. Okay. The other thing, if you notice, is really close to the ears. So if you have someone who has balance issues, it's usually results because of issues from the cerebellum, and then also from some kind of damage that can be going on in the ears. I actually have a disorder that causes me to have vertigo. Vertigo is a sense of loss of balance and everything. The room basically starts spinning, and the only thing I can do is really just lay down on the floor and wait for it to pass. It's not a fun disorder. Okay. The brain stem extends from the base of the cerebrum down to the foramen magnum. This controls your breathing and heart rate. So any kind of damage to the brain stem is going to greatly affect your breathing, or could greatly affect your breathing and your heart rate. Okay, so now we're going to go down into the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a soft column of nerve tissue. It exits the brain through the foramen magnum. It's that same connected to that brain stem. 31 pairs of spinal nerves branch from the spinal cord. Some fibers carry impulses in, others carry impulses away. Spinal nerves at different levels regulate activities of various parts of the body. Okay, it's very vulnerable to injury. Damage is usually irreversible, and injury can cause paralysis. We're going to talk about the spinal column a little bit more when we talk about the vertebrae. That's the bones that surround the spinal column and protect it. But basically, the spinal cord is what controls your movement, tells your body to move. It sends off these little branches out to all over your body that's going to help tell your body to move. So any kind of damage could greatly affect different parts of your body and your ability to move and react, to feel, and to touch. Okay. All right, so now we're going into that peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is made up of nerves that exit the spinal cord through an opening in the bony canal. It consists of sensory and motor nerves. Sensory nerves carry sensations such as smell, touch, heat, and sound from the body to the brain and the spinal cord. So if we go to touch the stove when we're a kid and it's hot, those sensory nerves tell our body hot, and they send a pain impulse to our brain that says ouch, and then our brain then processes that and says don't do that again, that hurts. Okay. Motor nerves carry information for the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles of the body. So sensory nerves process that smell, the touch, the heat. Motor nerves are what tells our muscles to move. Okay, so we open and close our hands, when we move our legs to walk, those are the motor nerves are what tell them to do those things. If a nerve is damaged, the body part will not function. Like my friend who had damage to his middle finger, now he basically flips everybody off all the time because he damaged those nerves in his finger. All right, then the autonomic nervous system, these are those things that we don't control. Our body just naturally does them, like your heart rate, digestion, sweating, and other autonomic processes of the body. Those things, swallowing, those things are just natural. We don't tell it to do that. Your eyes seeing, your intestines digesting, your kidneys processing, all of those things. We don't tell our body to do that. It's an automatic process. All right, so moving now to the skeletal system. The skeletal system is made up of 206 bones. Bones are made of living cells surrounded by hard deposits of calcium. Okay, so one reason why when you break a bone it hurts really bad, because you're causing damage to those cells. Bone cells are supplied by blood from vessels and nerves. Calciums give bone their strength and their rigidity, so it's also very important to consume calcium in some shape, form, or fashion, because that calcium is what helps build up strong bones. There are some people who have lower calcium levels. I feel like my dad is one of them. He's broken more bones than any child in our family, nieces, cousins, sisters, you name it. I really honestly feel like it's because he has lower calcium levels and his bones are just weaker. Either that or he just does more stupid things. I don't really know. Okay, so to start with the skeletal system, we're going to talk about the skull. The skull rests on top of the spinal column, houses the brain, certain glands, and the centers of special senses. The brain is two parts, the brain case or the cranium, okay, and then the face. So if you notice on the cranium, there's those tiny little ridges, okay, and those are joints, okay, and those joints are there, and they're fused not long after birth when we're a baby, but those little ridges, those little joints, those are actually not connected whenever we're a baby, because what those do is it creates, it allows our head to actually compress in, so that when we go through the birth canal, our skull can actually move and allows us to come through the birth canal. So a lot of times whenever you see a child who is born vaginally, they have kind of like a cone head looking look to them, because their skull is actually compressed in to allow them to go through the birth canal. After that, then those joints are going to actually fuse, and they're not going to be able to move after that. They're not going to give. Okay, up until the point that a child, an infant, you can still see when they're very young, you can still see there's kind of like a little triangle on the top of the head. It's called their soft spot. If you feel it, you actually can feel a little soft spot on the top of their head. And you can actually still see their pulse through the top of their head when they're very, very young. And then within the skull, you also have the face. Blood vessels and nerve trunks pass to and from the brain through the openings in the skull. Again, the skull can be fractured. It does not give unless you're an infant, you're going through the birth canal. The face extends from the eyebrows to the chin. Okay, everything else in the skull is called, is the cranium. Okay, going from the cranium, the skull, going down to the spinal column. The spinal column consists of irregular shaped bones called vertebrae. The vertebrae lie on top of each other to form a strong, flexible column that surrounds the spinal column. It protects the spinal column from any kind of damage. Also helps move the back. Okay, the spinal column is connected by ligaments. Those ligaments and those bones can be damaged and cause injury or by disease or from injury. Careless handling of an injured person can further injure the cord and possibly the person. So let's say you have someone who has a spinal injury. Let's say they have a fracture to one of their the vertebrae. But that vertebrae is protecting. It's still in there and it's protecting that spinal column. And those little bitty pieces of the ridges on those broken bone, they haven't yet touched the spinal cord. But let's say you move them and one of those sharp pieces of bone goes in and touches the spinal cord, that's when you can see that damage to the spinal cord. So that's why it's very important that if you have someone with any kind of a spinal injury, that you move them and you handle them very, very carefully. And you may or may not move them at all until trained individuals come and can help move them. Okay. The skeletal system is also made up of the thorax. The thorax is also known as your rib cage, made up of ribs in the sternum. Injuries to the thorax can puncture the lungs or the heart, so it's very important that the thorax are the bones that protect the heart and they protect the lungs. The lowest portion of the sternum, the sternum is that middle bone right there. That's where you're going to place your hand when we do CPR. It's called the xiphoid process. It's this little tiny bone right here. We're going to talk more about ribs when we start getting into chest injuries. The skeletal system is also made up of the pelvis. It's made up of two hip bones and the sacrum. Okay, so this is the sacrum. Okay, and these are your hip bones. Okay, this is your coccyx or your tailbone. Forms the floor of the abdominal cavity. Holds the bladder, the rectum, internal parts of the reproductive organs are all housed within here. Okay, this is a very large bone. Any kind of injury or damage where you might break your pelvic bones, that's going to be a pretty serious injury. And it's going to hurt a lot because it's a pretty large bone. Okay, moving from the skeletal system down to the leg bones. The upper leg is the femur. It's the largest and strongest bone in the body. Okay, any kind of a break to the femur is going to have a lot of pressure on it. I've only known a handful of people that I know that have broken their femur bone, either from being stepped on by a horse or from falling from a great height. Okay, the knee joint is the largest joint in the body and is a strong hinge joint. The knee joint is protected by the patella. That's your kneecap. That's a little tiny little bone right on top of your knee that you feel. It can actually move around. It's connected by ligaments. The lower leg is the tibia and the fibula. Tibia is the bigger bone. The fibula is the smaller bone. It's more often that you're going to break your fibula before you break your tibia, just because the tibia is a bigger bone. But you can break them together. The ankle is, if you break them together, you're probably going to see some kind of a deformity. We're going to talk about that more when we get into the injuries to the extremities. The ankle is made up of 7 bones called tarsals. They're bound firmly together by tough ligaments. The heel bone is the calcaneus. The calcaneus is going to transmit the weight of the body to the ground and forms a base for the muscles in the calf of the leg when walking. If you ever hurt your heel bone, if you ever bruise it, you know it's really difficult to walk and it's really difficult to put all your weight on your feet because it hurts. Okay. The sole and instep are formed of the foot formed by 5 long metatarsals. Okay, these help move the tarsals. Okay, which those middle that helps to move the tarsals, and the front row, the 2 bones of the phalanges. Okay, so those metatarsals are your foot bones, and that's what's going to help move your toes. It's also going to help you to move your ankle as well, your tarsal bones. Moving up to the shoulder and the arms, the shoulder girdle. Fractures are common within the shoulder girdle. The other thing that can happen are dislocations of that joint between the humerus and the clavicle and the scapula. Okay, so the collarbone is that bone that you feel right in the front. Okay, that's your clavicle. And then the shoulder blade is your scapula. That's that big bone that you feel in the back of your shoulder. The upper arm is your humerus. It's easily dislocated. Okay, the forearm is made up of your radius, which is the outer bone, and the ulna, which is the inner bone. Wrists and hands are made up of 8 bones, the carpals. Okay, tendons from forearm to fingers. The palms have 5 long bones, metacarpals, and then 14 bones of the fingers, or the phalanges. Okay, and the thumb is the most important digit of all because it's what allows you to hold things. Okay. Skeletal system is also made up of joints. Joints are where 2 or more bones meet or join. Some allow little movement. Your cranium actually does have those joints. There's no movement in those joints of the cranium. Others allow wide ranges of movement, like your hip or your shoulder. Okay, your hip is a ball. Your hip and your shoulder are ball and socket joints. The wrist is a saddle joint. Okay, a hinge joint would be like your elbow and your knee. Those are hinge joints. The neck is actually a joint as well. It's a pivot joint. Okay. Ligaments hold the bones and act as bands of flexible connective tissue. Ligaments are enclosed in capsules, and they actually have what's called a synovial fluid, which is a thick fluid that allows protection of those joints. If you ever hear somebody who says that they have no more cartilage in their knee, the cartilage acts as a buffer between the 2 bones. And it kind of prevents the bones from grinding together. So if you have someone who has no more cartilage in their knee because of overuse or from damage or something like that, that's when they're probably going to go in and do surgery and actually put something in there that's going to help keep those bones from grinding against each other. But that lack of cartilage is really bad and can cause lots of pain and could cause serious injury. The muscular system allows for body movement, walking, breathing, beating hard, all of those things. Able to perform work because of their ability to contract, become shorter and thicker. Okay, must have a nerve impulse to perform this action. So if you have damage to those nerves, then you're not going to be able to move those muscles. Fiber cells of the muscles are usually long and thread-like. There are 3 types of muscles: voluntary muscles, smooth muscles, and cardiac muscles. Voluntary muscles are under the control of the person. They make all deliberate acts possible, called skeletal muscles, can be injured in many ways. So when we tell our hands to open and close or our knee to move, we're telling our brain is sending those impulses to our muscles and telling them to move. Okay, smooth muscles have very little control by the person. They line the walls of 2 black structures like your intestine. There's little muscles that surround your intestine, and those muscles contract and relax, contract and relax, contract and relax, and that's what causes your intestine to digest your food. Cardiac muscles are found in the heart, and they need continuous supplies of oxygen and glucose. Those cardiac muscles are what causes your heart to pump. Okay. Send that oxygen-rich blood through your system. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the skin. The skin protects deep tissues from being injured, drying out, or being invaded by bacteria and other foreign bodies. Covers the entire body, regulates body temperature. The epidermis is the outer layer. Varies in thickness depending on what part of the body it's covering. Dead cells are constantly sloughed off. Okay. The dermis is the inner layer, rich supply of blood vessels and nerve endings. Contains sweat glands and oily glands. And they're above the subcutaneous layer. The subcutaneous layer is going to be that fatty tissue. So if you have any kind of injury that goes all the way down, that's going to be serious. It's probably going to bleed a lot because it's going to cut all those blood vessels and those nerves that are in the dermis. Okay, the skin is very important because it kind of acts as that protective layer to keep you from getting infections. So if you have any kind of cut, then that allows that cut is going to allow any kind of bacteria to get into the system, and that can lead to infection. So the skin is that protective layer that is on the outside of your body to prevent infection from getting into your system. All right, so that is the end of Chapter 3. If you have any questions, send me an email, give me a phone call, and I'll get back in touch with you as quickly as I can. Remember to send your emails properly. Tell me why you're emailing me and tell me who you are. If I don't hear who you are, I'm not going to respond. Make sure that you listen to the rest of the chapters for this week and take your quiz for this week, and have a great rest of the week.